Well, it's great to see everybody here this morning. Certainly do appreciate everybody for coming today. Made the mistake of not turning on the iPad before I got up here, so going to get a little Ryan Goodwin vamping before we get going today. I was in Iowa earlier this week for a gospel meeting and certainly did have a good time. Iowa's a beautiful state if you've never been there. I don't know why you'd be going. It's one of those states if you are going to Iowa, you know you're going to Iowa. But nobody ever woke up one morning and said, let's pack up the RV, honey. We're going to Iowa. But it's one of those states, I kind of count that as one of those underrated states that is a very beautiful place. It certainly is a place that is a reflection of God's glory in its own way, and a reminder also of how much we owe God for all of the provision that He's made for us. We live in a beautiful world that does supply us so many good things. We also owe farmers a great deal. Farmers do important work, and I made sure that before I left on my last evening there with that church in Madrid, Iowa, I said, this is just personal from me to you. Thank you for all the work that you do as farmers. I think we take it for granted, just what a breadbasket we have sitting right in the middle of North America. It is an incredible, incredible breadbasket full of grain and rich, beautiful, dark brown earth. And we really do take it for granted sometimes. Vamping complete. Have your Bibles open at this time to John chapter 19. We're going to get there in just a moment. I want to talk about truth today. Now, I'm going to be preaching truth. I certainly do hope. But I want to talk about the concept of truth. Truth is one of those interesting things because while it comes across as such a simple term, we know truth. 2 + 2 = 4. That is truth. It's cloudy outside today. That is truth. And yet, we often approach truth as a concept in much too philosophical of a manner. We kind of sit there and stroke our beards in a coffee shop going, well, what really is true? What do we mean when we talk about truth? And I think for such a concrete concept, at face value, we treat it as such a slippery, nebulous thing sometimes, which reminds me of John chapter 19, where we read a statement by Pontius Pilate. As Jesus has been briefly explaining himself to Pontius Pilate, and I do mean John chapter 18, sorry about that, not chapter 19. In John chapter 18, Jesus is talking here about who he is, and Pilate has confronted him about, well, why did you come here, and who are you, and are you a king? And here's the answer that Jesus offers in verse 37. You say correctly that I am a king, for this I have been born, for this I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. And Jesus is always very careful. That definite article, not a truth or my truth or some version of truth, but it is the singular truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So he's always very careful there to explain the truth. And everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And in response to that, Pilate says, what is truth? And notice, Jesus frequently uses the definite article, the truth. Pilate responds with no article at all. I am here to bear witness to the truth. Those who hear my voice, they hear the truth. And Pilate's going, well, what is truth? He doesn't say what is the truth. He says, what is truth? That's a much more philosophical concept, isn't it? What is truth? Not the truth that you're trying to explain to me, Jesus, but he is questioning not just the specific truth about Jesus, he is questioning truth in general. What is truth? And I don't want to get too far down this road because the scriptures don't say one way or the other about what Pilate's tone must have been or what Pilate was really looking for. And I suppose you could interpret it as like a truly inquisitive nature on Pilate's part. Like he legitimately wants to know, well, what is truth? I've always wanted to know. As a Roman official, I have seen truth all over the world, different versions of it. There's Greek truth and philosophical truth and pagan truth, and I have just seen so much different religions, and I want to know legitimately, truly, what is truth? Now, if you know who Pilate is based on history and the kind of man that he was and the kind of governor that he was, I think it is much more in keeping with the historical Pontius Pilate to take a more cynical approach to interpreting his statement here. And so I have always taken it not as a truly curious question about truth, but more like Pilate scoffing at the notion, like, truth? Jesus, your life is hanging in the balance right now, and you're talking about truth? Jesus of Nazareth, I could kill you in a moment. At just the snap of a finger, I could have you flogged, send you out to be crucified, or I could have you released. And you want to sit here and have some like deep philosophical conversation about the truth. Jesus, what even is truth? And you see, you can flip it around just depending on how you interpret it. And like I said, I tend to take it as a much more cynical thing that Pilate is saying. Now, the idea of truth and things that are true, that's actually a big theme in John's writings, and you're going to see that quite a bit. When you read the Gospel of John and his 3 epistles, you're going to see truth or true a lot of times. Like the word true itself is used 28 times in his Gospel and in his 3 apostles. He says things like, true vine and true witness, true drink, true bread, true worshipers, true light. He also uses the word truth itself 47 times. And so you can tell that in John's writings, truth and things that are true are very important to him as a writer. Now, it's all inspired by the Holy Spirit, but you can tell that in the Holy Spirit's inspiration, that even with that inspiration to John himself, the writer, this was something that is very distinctive about John, the writer. And I always get the sense that when you talk about true things or when you talk about the truth, you are talking about something that has substance, it has reality, there's an unchangeableness to that word. It's not opinion, it's not perspective, it's not, well, that's just your truth and I've got my truth. John uses true and truth in this very definite, solid way. So have your Bibles open to 1 John. We're going to spend the rest of our lesson camped in 1 John. That was all just introduction there, but put a bookmarker there in 1 John. We're going to pretty much stay there in 1 John the rest of the lesson. Here's what I want to do. I want to track truth through 1 John, just 1 John, because I think there's some incredible lessons that we learn about truth from just this letter by itself, some applications, some lessons about truth. And we're going to get to that in the second part of this lesson. But for now, I want to just talk about the context of 1 John and what was going on in the time that John was writing this letter. Most likely he's writing this in the second half of the first century, perhaps very late during his life. Presumably John lived to almost the end of the first century. He might have been a 90-plus-year-old man by the time he died as he got near the end of the first century. And there were some things going on among Christians that were very disturbing to this aged apostle. He knew Jesus personally. He was the apostle who Jesus loved, so described in the Gospel of John. He's the last living apostle. All of the others, again, presumably, All of the others have been martyred or died at some point, and here's John, the old apostle, the last of the original 12. He alone is left alive, and he's seeing some things in the church that are really bothering him. There's a divide that is happening in the church that is quite disturbing to the apostle John. Now, history shows, and the writings of early Christians also confirm, that there was a schism developing in the second half of the first century among Christians. And it was a schism that you could, I think, very roughly or crudely define as the intellectual versus the non-intellectual Christians. And I want to be careful. When I use the term intellectual, I don't mean intelligent, okay? There's a difference between being intellectual and being intelligent. And there are a lot of people who are not intellectuals, right? They don't consider themselves intellectuals. They don't consider academic pursuits to be something that's engaging to them. Being a non-intellectual doesn't mean you're non-intelligent. And there are a lot of very intelligent people who would not consider themselves to be intellectual. So I'm very careful when I use that term. I am not saying intelligent, I mean intellectual, okay? And in the second half of the first century, there was a divide between more intellectual Christians and those who were non-intellectual Christians, who viewed things very black and white, very plain and simple, versus much more nuanced or much more in the line of Greek philosophy and Greek intellectual pursuits. Now, this kind of came in the form, by the end of the first century, of proto-Gnosticism. I'm using a big fancy word, just bear with me. Proto-Gnosticism is just the term that's applied to like very early Gnosticism. And Gnosticism kind of flourished in the second and third centuries A.D. And it's just the idea, that there is this separation between spirit and flesh. That flesh is always bad and spirit is always good. And that the more spiritual you can become through like intellectual pursuits, the more knowledge that you have, the more you kind of access like this great high knowledge up here, the more spiritual you become. And that's what the word Gnostic literally means, is knowledge, right? That's where we get our word for knowledge, is Gnosticism. And so they believed that there was this special knowledge way up here in the clouds. It was inaccessible to most people. Most people were never going to get it. It was kind of this only the initiated, only the truly enlightened were ever going to understand this special secret knowledge way up here. Now, at first you might go, all right, well, I guess I don't see what the real problem is there with Gnosticism. Here's the real problem. In actual practice, this is what happened. The more intellectual Christians viewed this knowledge as being the source of their salvation. The more I access this high and mighty knowledge, the more spiritual I become. The more spiritual I become, the more separated I am from the flesh. And the more separated from the flesh I am, the more the flesh doesn't matter. And what ended up happening was that the Gnostics indulged in fleshly desires and fleshly things. You know why? Because if my mind is up here in the clouds, in this great high and mighty knowledge, my mind is up here, enlightened, close to God. So it doesn't really matter what my flesh does. And so they would indulge in sexual sins. They would indulge in drunkenness. They would indulge in fleshly desires because the flesh can't touch me. Whatever the flesh does has no impact on my high and mighty knowledge. Now you start to see why that's a problem, right? And that's a great theme that you actually see a lot in John's writings as well, is the impact that the flesh has on us and how dangerous the flesh can be, and that it doesn't matter how smart you are or how enlightened you are or where your mind, my mind is up in the clouds, so it doesn't matter if my flesh is down in the mud. No, it very much matters. It very much matters. Now, that is full-fledged Gnosticism, and there's more involved in it than that. It's much more complicated than that. But that is the problem, at least in its earliest form, that John was dealing with by the end of the first century. This divide where you have non-intellectual Christians who are just looking for just tell me how to live. I just want to know how to live. I want to live in the flesh for God. I want to devote myself to God. I don't want to follow after fleshly things. I just want to know, how am I supposed to live in truth, in the truth, in the flesh for God, so that I'm living for the Spirit in the end. But the more intellectual side of that was always pulling another direction. Let me give you one passage in 1 John that I think sums up the problem that John and other Christians were facing in this time. Let's go to 1 John chapter 2 and follow along here, beginning in verse 21. 1 John chapter 2, beginning in verse 21. And we'll go through the end of the chapter. Bear with me, it's a longer passage. But this explains what they were facing here in John's own language. 1 John chapter 2, beginning in verse 21. I have not written to you because you do not know the truth, but because you do know it, and because no lie is of the truth. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. Whoever denies the Son does not have the Father. The one who confesses the Son has the Father also. Here's the other way that Gnosticism was starting to bear its fruit, even in the first century. If flesh is always bad and spirit is always good, what do we do about Jesus? That's a tough question, isn't it? Because we want to say that Jesus is the Son of God, but that means that the Son of God came in the flesh. But if flesh is always bad, then that means that the Son of God was in the flesh being bad. So you have two options, okay? To resolve this issue, you have two choices. Either Jesus isn't actually the Son of God, in which case he's just a flesh and blood human being who kind of like acted like the Son of God. I don't know about that. Or your option is the Son of God wasn't actually in the flesh. He looked like flesh and acted like flesh, but he wasn't real flesh. Those are both heresy. Let's be clear about that. Because in the one case, you are removing the deity from the man Jesus. God cannot possibly be in the flesh because flesh is always bad, therefore Jesus in the flesh is not God. You're removing the deity from Jesus the man. But the other one is heresy because you're removing the man from the Christ by saying that, Jesus wasn't really in the flesh. He was the Son of God. He looked like flesh, acted like flesh, but wasn't really flesh. No, the truth is, in Colossians, the truth is that he's the fullness of deity dwelling in bodily form. He's both. He's a full human being, flesh and blood, but he's also God at the same time. And that bothered the Gnostics, their preconceptions that they had. It was a puzzle that bothered them, and they tried to find a resolution to it. And here's John the Apostle saying, that's a puzzle. You have to just accept the mystery. Because you can't deny either side of that. You can't deny the deity from the man Jesus. You can't deny the man from the Christ. You can't deny either one. He goes on in verse 24 and says, as for you, let that abide in you which you heard from the beginning. If what you heard from the beginning abides in you, you also will abide in the Son and in the Father. And this is the promise which he himself has made to us, eternal life. Now these things I have written to you concerning those who are trying to deceive you. So clearly there was a schism developing in the church. They were being deceived by somebody. And as for you, verse 27, the anointing which you received from him abides in you, and you have no need for anyone to teach you. But as his anointing teaches you about all things, and is true, and is not a lie, and just as it has taught you, you abide in him. Little children, verse 28, abide in him, so that when he appears we may have confidence and not shrink away from him in shame at his coming. If you know that he is righteous, you know that everyone who practices righteousness is born of him. And that's the development that happened in the second half of the first century. That Christians were beginning to argue with one another about the nature of Jesus. Some were denying one element or another of Jesus Christ, while others were trying to stand up for the truth by saying, yeah, but that's not what we've heard from the beginning. We're just trying to stay true with what we've heard from the beginning. Which leads to the big application, which is standing up for truth. Really should have said the truth on that, on that screen, right? Don't want to undermine myself too much with my visuals. Should have been standing up for the truth. Here are two disturbing tendencies that I notice in the church today as much as the first century. Okay, two things that I notice when it comes for standing up for the truth. The first one is this idea of the intellectual versus the non-intellectual. And I think both sides have something they need to watch out for, okay? Both sides have something, there's a danger that they need to watch out for. There's a temptation for really intellectual Christians to not be satisfied with really simple answers, or to not be satisfied with things that just don't have an answer at all. You know, this curious thing about, okay, how can Jesus Christ be God and man at the same time? I don't get it. It's bothering me. We've got to find an answer for that. Either he was the Son of God but not really in the flesh, or he was in the flesh but couldn't have been the Son of God at the same time. I need to have an answer. I got to sit here and overanalyze it and tear it apart, and I want to see the pieces, and I want to see a chart, and I'm going to read a book about it. I'm going to go talk to a guy with a PhD about it. And you know what John's answer would be to that? He's both. And you don't have to understand that. How can he be God and man at the same time? How can Colossians be right that he's the fullness of deity dwelling in bodily form? I don't know. How can Philippians be right that he did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself and came in the form of a bondservant to die on a cross? Are we even able to fully understand the inner workings of deity? No. And so to the Gnostic, the answer just is, there are some things you're not going to get. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to remove the Gnostic label from your life, because knowledge isn't salvation. Being smart isn't salvation. Being intellectual isn't salvation. You are not saved because of Gnosticism in whatever form it might come in. Sometimes the answers are either very simple and you go, no, it can't be that simple. Can't be that simple. Or there's just not an answer that you're ever going to be able to understand. And you're going to be okay with that. But I think also for someone who is not interested in intellectual pursuits, for the non-Gnostic, it's kind of a mouthful, I get that. We need to be very, very careful about dismissing intellectualism in general. Right, where sometimes we do take things that are really, we take an answer, it's simple, and we go, hey, listen, it's just very, very simple. No need to complicate it. When something may, in fact, be rather complicated. And so I think both sides need to be really, really careful about that. And I think that's a real danger, isn't it? It's a real danger. I think, but then the other side is, dividing a church over things like this. I think that's the other danger, is we need to be very careful when it comes to creating factions and divisions in a church over, intellectual versus non-intellectual, the PhD versus the not PhD. I think that is also a real danger that we sometimes have. Where does our confidence come from? Think about that. Where does your confidence come from? He talks there in 1 John 2 about confidence, right? Let's go back to that passage and just remind ourselves what he says. I believe it was in verse 28, where he made a statement here in verse 28. Now, little children, abide in him, so that when he appears, we may have confidence and not shrink away from him in shame at his coming. Where does the confidence come from? Because this is what was happening in the time of John. You had Christians who were perhaps older Christians, non-intellectual, kind of first generation, second generation type Christians who were like, listen, I was a very young man back in the day, but I remember when John the Apostle came here. I remember hearing Peter preach about something. Listen, maybe I'm even old enough that I heard Jesus preach a time or two, and I never remembered Jesus or Peter or Paul saying what you're saying. I don't remember them. I mean, maybe I'm just an old guy with a bad memory, but I don't remember Jesus, Peter, Paul, or John saying the things that you're saying right now. But then younger, more intellectual Christians are saying, well, that's just because you're old. Just listen to me. Just trust me. Just trust me. I went to the best Greek school. Trust me on this. It's more complicated than that. Trust me on this. And our confidence is undermined sometimes because we feel like maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I don't get it. Maybe I am too dumb to understand what's going on here. Where does your confidence come from? The confidence on either side. I don't care if you're really smart or if you think you're not smart. And by the way, most people who think they're not smart are smarter than they think they are. And we need to be very careful, by the way, about like false modesty or something like that. We use it as a smokescreen or a defense mechanism. Or sometimes we go like, well, I'm not a very smart man here, so I guess I just don't get it. I don't know, like, I feel like that sometimes can be sort of a disingenuous defense mechanism that we throw up there. But, you know, whatever side you're on that, whatever intelligence level you think that you are, confidence doesn't come from intelligence. Confidence doesn't come from knowledge. The Gnostics needed to understand that. The confidence comes in Jesus. And the more confident I am in Jesus, the more confident I am when he will appear. What verse 28 is saying. We are not going to shrink away from him in shame at his coming because, he says, we have confidence. All right. Let's go ahead and bring the lesson to a close in the next 10 or 15 minutes with the application section. I want to really look at some things here. And again, we're just staying in 1 John. Because up to this point, I know all of this has been sort of theoretical. I get that. Like, okay, Ryan, what's your point here? What's your point? There are a lot of things in just 1 John alone that teach us the value of the truth, the simple, plain truth. What does truth do for us? What does truth build for us? What is the value of knowing truth? What is the value in taking truth from hypothetical to real life? And when you're someone who knows the truth, when you're an open-minded person to the truth, these are the gifts that you see. These are the treasures that you have access to. I want to start with this, and this one's not up on the screen, but I want to just throw it in here because I think it's kind of an umbrella, kind of an overarching sort of thing. Go to chapter 2, verses 3 through 6. 1 John 2, verses 3 through 6. It says, by this we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commandments. The one who says, I have come to know him, does not keep his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him the love of God has truly been perfected. By this we know that we are in him. The one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked. He talks about the truth there, abiding in the truth, walking in the truth, keeping God's commandments. One incredible thing about the truth is that truth does build confidence in salvation. I mean, if you want to know if you're following a recipe correctly, I saw a meme the other day on Facebook, and it showed a garbage can, and it showed, be honest, how many times have you had to go back to this garbage can to check the cooking instructions on that thing? You know how it is? Like you always know, like, I've got it. And you unwrap the package and you throw the package away, and then you throw whatever it is, Pillsbury cinnamon buns or something like that. And you're like, wait, how many minutes did it say to put those in for? 20 or 25? And you go back at 20 minutes, you go, 15. Whoops, that's what that smell is. Sterling baked me my birthday cake, and my birthday was on Friday. He baked me my favorite birthday cake, and he did it all by himself. And he was very diligent about looking at the recipe. Whenever he had a question, whenever he wasn't sure, was it teaspoon or tablespoon, was it 1 or was it 2, he always went back to the recipe. You know why? Because the recipe is the truth. Not a truth, it's not one possible way. When you're following a recipe, there is one way to get the desired outcome. And especially with baking, because it's all chemistry. The difference between a teaspoon of baking powder and a tablespoon of baking powder, that is a huge difference when it comes to chemical reactions in baking. There is one truth. If your desired outcome is this thing over here, a wacky cake or something like that, if that is your desired outcome, there is the truth to find that desired outcome. And do you want to know how to build confidence as you go through that process? The way to build confidence is to go back and consult the truth. Look at the recipe. Check and then recheck it. And the more you rely on the truth, the more confidence you have. Not confidence in yourself, like you're good enough, you're smart enough, like I can do this on my own. It's not self-reliance. Actually, the more we depend on the truth, the more what we're saying to God is, I'm depending on you, because I can't do this on my own. I have to do it by your way, God. I have to do it by your recipe, by your path, by the truth. And that's actually showing God that you have confidence in Him, not in yourself. Otherwise, we would say, I'm going to bake you a chocolate cake, Dad, and we just throw stuff into a pan and see what comes out. And that is not the way to build confidence as we're on this long and treacherous journey to heaven. But a second thing, and it's total forgiveness. When we follow the truth, we understand the path to forgiveness. Go to chapter 1 now. And in one of my favorite passages in 1 John, read chapter 1, verses 8 through 10. If we say that we have no sin, we're deceiving ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and righteous to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say that we have not sinned, we make Him a liar, and His word is not in us. And of course, the truth about Jesus is that He is our advocate and our propitiation, as verses 1 and 2 of the next chapter clearly point out. And if you're a heretic when it comes to Jesus, don't expect Jesus to stand at your side as your advocate. If you're a heretic about who He was, don't expect to show up on the judgment day and go, well, I know that I didn't explain Jesus correctly. And He'll go, yeah, didn't explain. That's the gentle way to put it. You're a heretic. You said I wasn't God. Or you said I didn't come in the flesh. And that the cross that I bore, the blood that I shed, the body that died, you say it's ineffectual. You're a heretic. And if you're a heretic about the truth of Jesus Christ, do not expect to have an advocate and a propitiation for you on the judgment day. A second application to the truth is that the truth builds a close relationship with God. The closer we are to the truth, the more it fosters an honest and true relationship with Him. Take a look at chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. See how great a love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called children of God, and such we are. For this reason, the world does not know us, because it did not know Him. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not appeared as yet what we shall be. We know that when He appears, we shall be like Him, and because we shall see Him just as He is. And so the more that we depend on the truth and rely on the truth, the closer we get to God. A second one is full assurance and not guesswork. I think maybe going back to the idea of the recipe, to me that's kind of where I get that concept from, is that I'm not hoping that a wacky cake comes out of the oven. I know that a wacky cake is going to come out of the oven. I have full assurance. I'm not just guessing. Now, let me make another application here, this whole intellectual versus non-intellectual kind of divide that tends to happen among Christians. I think that something very disturbing sometimes happens when we have confidence in what we think is the truth, but is actually just our assumptions about truth. Let me explain what I mean. We have truth right here. And do we all agree that God's word is true? Yes, 100%. We all agree God's word is true. God is always true. Like Romans 9 talks about, even if every man in the world was a liar, let God still be found true. God is true. But do we sometimes mix up our assumptions about truth with truth itself? Do we sometimes mix up our conclusions about the Bible with truth itself? Do we sometimes mix up our guesses, our inferences? Do we sometimes mix up what we believe about the Bible versus the truth of the Bible? And I'll say that happens to both sides of it, right? Intellectual versus non-intellectual, liberal versus conservative, whatever term you want to throw in there, there is danger for both sides where we prop up our assumptions about the truth with the truth itself. The Bible is true. God is true. His word is true. And we need to work very, very hard at all times. We need to pursue at all times, no matter what side of a spectrum we fall on, liberal or conservative, everybody, all of us, we have to be very careful to not conflate our assumptions about the truth with what is the truth. It's very, very dangerous. I think another application, though, about the truth that we learn from 1 John is that a life in heaven is better because of the truth. Notice chapter 2, verse 25. And this is the promise which he himself has made to us, eternal life. Go to chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. He says, and the witness is this, that God has given us eternal life, and this life is in his Son. He who has the Son has the life. He who does not have the Son does not have the life. You have a life in heaven because of the truth. Your assurance is not because of a lie. We're not lying to ourselves. We have a promise from God who is always true, that we have a life in heaven with him. And when I rely on the truth, I know that I have that life in heaven. We also have strength to overcome. It is by the truth that we overcome all things. Chapter 5, verse 4. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Now, I make an assumption here, but I think that what he's saying here, by our faith, if our faith is based on the truth, and I believe that our faith is based on the truth. Verse 18 of the same chapter, we know that no one who is born of God sins, but he who is born of God keeps him, and the evil one does not touch him. Verse 19, we know that we are of God, and the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. The whole world lies in the power of the evil one, but you have strength to overcome that, and it is by the truth. And we also understand true love in chapter 4, verses 7. And really through the end of the chapter, it talks in great detail about the kind of love that we have. And it's a love that is a true love. It's a love that is based in truth. Remember what 1 Corinthians 13 says about love. Love rejoices in the truth. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing and evil. It rejoices in the truth. And so it is, as John explains in chapter 4 of 1 John, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. Verse 11, beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. Verse 16, and we have come to know him and believe the love which God has for us. God is love, and the one who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. Verse 17, by this love is perfected with us, that we may have confidence in the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world. In verse 18, there is no fear in love, But perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. And we'll end with verse 21. And this commandment we have from him, that the one who loves God should love his brother also. And that's not like your version of love and my version of love. That's not kind of what's the popular notions of love, or the definition of love that's just kind of by the world standard. That is love that is of the truth, and it is love that knows the truth, and it is love that follows truth as well. And when we define love by God's standard of love, then we will finally understand love as it is meant to be known. We're going to go and bring our lesson to a close, and after this, we're going